Could your company require you to get a COVID-19 vaccine or get tested weekly? The Supreme Court is actually considering that argument today, looking at two of Biden's vaccine mandates. As Shannon LaNier reports, what they decide could have long-term impacts beyond vaccines.
The federal vaccine mandate debate front and center. Today, the Supreme Court heard arguments about two of President Biden's COVID-19 vaccine mandates. The first is the vaccine or testing requirement for employees at businesses with more than 100 workers. The second is the vaccine mandate for healthcare providers who get funding through Medicare or Medicaid. Now, if you're thinking, wait, hasn't the Supreme Court already decided on some vaccine mandates? You're right, they have. But these cases are a bit different because they involve federal agencies, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, and the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and whether they have the authority to issue these mandates. States claim the lawsuit doesn't take into account the power states have. The Department of Justice will argue the mandates are critical to the country's COVID-19 response and recovery, with White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki saying, quote, "The need and the urgency for these policies is greater than ever, and we are confident in the legal authority for both policies." The Supreme Court will have to determine whether the mandates should take effect while the questions of legality and constitutionality continue to play out. Whatever the justices decide, it might be a sign of how the High Court could handle future cases regarding executive power. Shannon LaNier.
All right. That was Shannon LaNier reporting. Now let's take a listen to some of the arguments from the justices from today.
How can it be in the public interest, which is a requirement? How can it be a balance of harms in this case? Assuming the arguments aren't off the wall on the government side, and believe me, they're not. Okay, that's what I want to hear the answer to.
Justice Breyer, states can act, private businesses have acted on historic levels. This is going to cause a massive economic shift in the country, billions upon billions of non-recoverable costs. Testing also is not frequently available. This is in our appendix at page 374. Among those employers who have attempted to do so, only 28% are able to find adequate providers to ensure that weekly testing is available for the employees. If Congress intended to give an occupational health agency the power to mandate vaccines across the country, it needed to do so clearly. States can do it, businesses have done it and are able to do it. The question is not what is this country going to do about COVID, it's who gets to decide that.
I don't think as more and more mandates and more agencies come into place, it's a little hard to accept the idea that this is particularized to this thing, that it's a OSHA regulation, that it's a CMS regulation, that it's a federal contractor regulation. It seems to me that it's the government is trying to work across the waterfront, and it's just going agency by agency. I mean, this has been referred to, the approach, as a workaround, and I'm wondering what it is you're trying to work around.
What we're trying to do here, and what OSHA did, was rely on its express statutory authority to provide protection to America's workforce from grave dangers like this one. So I take the point and don't dispute that COVID-19 is a danger in many contexts and falls within the jurisdiction of other agencies as well. But I think to suggest that because this disease is so prevalent, because it presents such a widespread harm, somehow OSHA has less power to do anything about it with respect to
No, it's not so much that OSHA has less power. It's that the idea that this is specific to particular agencies really doesn't hold much water when you're picking them off one by one.
All right, the mandates were issued before the first detection of the Omicron variant. Now the debate shifts to how much control does the government actually have over us? All right, joining us now, we have Alencia Johnson. She's a Democratic strategist and also former senior advisor to now President Biden during the Obama administration. Also joining us, Kerryanne Burke, political strategist and legal analyst. Ladies, it's a pleasure to have you both. Welcome to BNC Live. So Kerryanne, we'll start with you. Now, we just heard both sides of the argument. What's your response?
My response is that this is a very peculiar issue. Obviously, the major concern that we see is whether the OSHA agency is overstepping their actual express powers. We're really having a question of whether they are pretty much going to adhere to the doctrine of the major question. Does Congress have to explicitly state these powers in order for this federal agency to act. So it's a question between the branches of government, in all honesty. That is really the crux of this case. And I think as Americans, we are trying to figure out, is the executive branch overreaching in regards to these mandates? And is the congressional branch of government, the legislative branch of government, are they not doing enough to be explicit as to how much and how many mandates do the employees at federal agencies or contractors or even private companies that contract with the federal government, how much overreaching does the government have into their lives in regards to this particular pandemic? So that is the crux of it, and it's quite interesting to hear the justices speak in this manner.
All right, Alencia, excuse me. You worked for the Obama administration. What are your thoughts?
You know, it's interesting because I think this mandate is one of now President Biden's key pieces of us getting out of the COVID-19 pandemic, especially as you mentioned before. This, this conversation started way before the Omicron variant even came to present. The reality is, this is a way for the GOP and conservatives to continue to kick the ball down the road and not have their states issue mandates, their business owners issue mandates. But the irony is a lot of businesses have already issued mandates. A lot of states have already started to work within some of these parameters. And so right now we're having this conversation to keep this conversation in the public. But the reality is our government is supposed to protect us. Our government is supposed to protect us from so many forms of danger. And right now we are in the middle of a public health crisis. 800,000 Americans have died. And this administration is doing everything that it can to ensure that those numbers go down, that less people are impacted by the coronavirus. And we know that these vaccines work. We heard in the oral arguments today that the FDA has said that these are very safe vaccines. And we know that even in past administrations and during past hearings like this, we've upheld vaccine mandates for universities, for schools, for some government agencies. And so right now we're trying to have this conversation of getting more people back to work, getting the country to be moving forward, to get our economy working again. And the key to that is a vaccine mandate. And so we'll see what happens, but it'll be interesting to hear the conversations as the arguments continue.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting and the irony of all of this is two lawyers arguing against the mandate actually tested positive.
Yeah.
They're arguing by phone. So, I mean, what's your response to that? Alencia,
yeah, you know,
we'll
the irony in that. Yeah, the irony in that too is, in addition to these two lawyers, right, they tested positive for COVID-19. You know, I'm sitting here in Virginia. The governor-elect, him and his administration have joined these arguments and in support of pushing back on these mandates, although he has the vaccine. All of the Supreme Court justices, even the ones appointed by Donald Trump, have the vaccine. So many of these officials who are arguing against the mandate either have the vaccine or, like we've seen with these two lawyers, they don't have the vaccine, but they've caught COVID, right? And we know that COVID, you know, without the vaccine, unfortunately, that allows for room for severe disease and hospitalization. And so it's interesting what is happening in these people's private lives, but how they're trying to make this conversation publicly to discourage vaccine mandates and discourage a whole group of Americans from getting vaccines that are free and accessible and very low risk and safe. That will save so many lives.
Yeah, Kerryanne, I'll swing it over to you. And it's worth noting that just because you are vaccinated, that doesn't mean you can't have a breakthrough case. We've seen that over and over again. But the underline here is that vaccines save lives, according to health officials.
Yeah, and just to jump in, as a lawyer, we have to argue any side of the fence, whether you believe it or not. You definitely have to go into the courtroom and present the legal issues at hand. And even though those, for instance, those two lawyers that have gotten COVID and they're not vaccinated and they are arguing against the mandate and so forth, they're really arguing a legal issue. So I don't want people to walk away from these cases saying that it's just anti-mandate, but they're actually arguing about whether there is authority for OSHA to institute these mandates. And that's quite different than just being an anti-vaxxer. So on the legal side of it, they're trying to figure out, are they overstepping their boundaries under the basically under the laws of this land, under the ideas of federalism, the separation of powers between the legislative branch and the executive branch. That is the undercurrent. The
Kerryanne,
political side of it.
I want to ask you a question. Since you're on that, since you're heading in the direction that I'm actually about to ask you a question about, we already have vaccine mandates. What makes this one so different?
What makes it different is because it is OSHA's. OSHA doesn't have the express authority to act in this manner. That is the argument. And it's the federal agency and it's under the authority of the executive branch. They're basically saying, as attorneys who are against this mandate, that they would need an express act of Congress to actually make this be a legal mandate. So they're basically going to say that there is a problem of them overstepping their authority that is expressed through acts of Congress under the federal rules and regulations that they operate under. And they're going beyond that. And this is why it's improper. And if they want this authority, they need to have the express act of Congress telling them what their parameter is. OSHA, on the other side of the fence, is saying, well, we do have the authority because we have emergency powers because we're in a health crisis. So that's the real crux of the question that everyone's trying to figure out. What is going on? Do they actually have this authority or not? Is it overstepping into becoming too much for the American people? So that's the difference. Whereas at the state levels, we already know that the states have the right to do this, to actually institute mandates and deal with the health crisis in their boundaries, according to the constitutions of the state, according to other regulations and place precedents.
Okay, Alencia, my final question to you, if you were still advising now President Biden, if the Supreme Court shuts this down, what would you advise him to do?
You know, I would hope for him to take it to Congress, right? Let's have this conversation with Congress to continue to push forward that way. And then also have another conversation with a lot of these governors. There are so many ways for us to move forward with vaccine requirements. And, you know, the administration does a lot of work with business leaders, small business owners, large business owners, so many different business leaders. Let's get the business community galvanized together. I mean, we see this in the NBA, we see all these vaccine mandates, and they're thriving. We can have this conversation at a national level. And so I think there are ways to continue to push forward with this vaccine mandate. I know that the Biden administration is confident that this will be upheld. And so we'll see in the weeks and months to come.
All right, ladies, thank you so much for stopping by BNC Live this afternoon. Have a fabulous weekend.